Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Recover You. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Kylene.
Quick reminder to everyone, if you were a member of the Recover You Facebook group in the past, it was taken down for trademark infringement. That was retracted, but I never gained re-access to the group, so we have started a new group. So if you are a betrayed partner, whether you were in there previously or if you are new to the podcast, welcome. We do have a new Facebook group. It's all set up, and please click the link in the show notes in order to join. We would love to have you. And it's a way to ask questions. I will personally be able to connect with you in there. This past week, I'll share the podcast episode in there and then say, hey, what were your thoughts or feedback or questions about this? And so last week we had the Rab Smith interview, and they were talking about the pyramid of intimacy. And so sharing that in the group, women were able to kind of share how encouraging that was and how it supported them and their recovery and their perspective on it. So things like that. It's really nice to be able to connect with all of you. So please click the link in the show notes. I would love to connect with you more deeply there. All right. Well, today's episode, what should we call it, Patrick? Are your strengths also your weaknesses? ?
How your weaknesses can be your strengths.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a more positive way of saying it. Or should we go for the shock value? I don't know.
Yeah.
3 things every person needs. I don't know. So we're going to talk about sort of 3 strengths that can also, we've all heard that term, right? Your strength can be your weakness. And so we're just going to pull out some specific examples of what this can look like in, addiction and betrayal and trauma recovery and all of that. So let's start with number 1. The number 1 strength that can also be a weakness, and let me just pause just for a second before we jump too quickly into it. The reason we want to talk about this is because both people, what I've noticed through recovery with couples is that we all have to be aware of our own patterns. And we've talked about in different episodes how the betrayed partner needs to be careful not to fall into the exact same patterns that the addict used as part of their addiction. And the way that happens for us is because they show up differently. But we've talked about how they can actually be the same pattern. It just shows up differently, so we're not aware of it. And so this isn't just an addict thing. This isn't just a betrayed partner thing. This is a human thing. It's like, how do we learn? And that's something we talk about recovery a lot, the quote unquote gift of recovery, the opportunity that we were sort of thrust into, so to speak, is this opportunity to learn how to be healthy humans, how to identify when we are engaging in behaviors or thought patterns that sort of take us to one end of the spectrum or the other instead of in the middle where there is a healthy balance. And so this concept of strengths and weaknesses also plays into that. And so we just sort of want to, again, share our own personal experiences and awareness and maybe in a way that is relatable to you so that we can continue growing as we become more and more and more aware of these things. So the first strength that can be a weakness is the addict can compartmentalize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the strength there is that, or let's start with the weakness. The weakness is that the addict can compartmentalize.
Yeah.
So in the addiction, they're able to sort of live in this world where, well, I'll give you as an example, your addiction was so much totally in this box and you were not somebody that it translated into the real world at all. And that's not everybody's story, but this is just an example of how this can manifest. Mm-hmm. And then, but on the flip side, your ability to compartmentalize seemed to be quite helpful in your recovery as well, because you put all of those behaviors in a box, you locked it up, you learned how to never open it again, and your brain, in a way that maybe some others wouldn't necessarily be able to accomplish, was able to sort of like turn that button, flip that switch off.
Yeah.
And so you are very able to compartmentalize. And that's not going to be everybody's story exactly, but when somebody's really good at compartmentalizing, I mean, there is a helpful aspect there.
Yeah, I think I can expand on that. So, when I was in addiction, I was able to close that door, and be present, as best I can. I will say that as the addiction grew and my anguish grew, the ability to put it away was harder and harder because I wasn't living into what my core beliefs are about myself. But once I got into recovery, the one area where I think it helped, and I worked on this, was I can go through recovery work, but then also at a moment kind of set it aside and be present for you, without stumbling down. I wasn't always successful at that, but always without stumbling down a shame spiral. And so I was able to kind of be there, understanding, for you, when you needed me to be present, and I could be present, but I was still ashamed, right? But I learned fairly quickly how to be there for you and be able to comfort you. Now, over time, I think the thing we always want to be careful when we talk about the addict compartmentalizing is you always want to make sure that you check in and say, hey, are you being open and honest? Are you being authentic with who you are? Like, what you don't want to do from a compartmentalizing standpoint is you don't want to be like, well, I'm never going to tell you how I feel, or I'm never going to tell you, I'm never going to speak up for what I believe, because that's actually, if you look at the faster scale, it's one of those things that can end up being kind of a bad thing. But my point is, and I think your point is, that I compartmentalized as an addict, and then I was able to use that compartmentalizing to put the behavior away,
Right.
for long enough that the behavior became gone.
Yeah, so you weren't
Right.
that's a good point. Because we don't want that to be heard as, well, I just closed the box and then I stepped into the world of denial and I never dealt with the reason. Yeah. I hope people don't hear that, because in so many of our other episodes, we're talking about the work that you've done emotionally to actually deal with the why of the behavior.
Right, yeah.
But no, I was specifically thinking about acting out itself, because for you specifically, you had a box of acting out. Your behaviors fit in a specific box. And outside of that, you interacting with other human beings and your thought life and the way you viewed women and the way you talked to women and the way you talked to me and the way you treated people was outside of that box. So it was very much like, I am somebody that lives in the real world, and then I choose to step into this world, and there are different rules in that world.
Right.
And that's where it can be really bad, because that's where the denial, the self-manipulation, the qualifying thoughts and behaviors of like, well, this isn't that bad. It's like it's in this separate world, and there's these different rules, and I'm not, interacting this way with other people. And so like, it's okay if I do this, or this isn't as bad as this other behavior. And that's where this compartmentalization can go so wrong and hurt so many people over time. And to your point, something that we haven't talked about a whole lot, I don't think, is that it did become more difficult for you. And the only red flags that I did have before discovery that I had no idea were associated with your behavior were more emotional. And so,
and even health related, like there were some
health
things that were
related
shown
and
up
emotionally
health
related.
yeah.
And I had no idea what those were until discovery. And then we started learning about everything. And then looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, you had these anger outbursts that were like so totally not your personality at all. They were out of the blue. They were completely just unlike you, so totally unlike you. And I think there were 2 within like 6 months before discovery. And then, yeah, your blood pressure was through the roof. Your eyes were yellow. It was really just bizarre. And we had no idea what was going on. And then, other like little things that I look back and I had these thoughts of like, hey, we don't like really spoon when we're sleeping anymore. You're sleeping like 3 feet away from me. And I was like, well, we've been married almost 10 years or 9 or whatever it was. I was like, well, maybe that's just part of it. Like, it wasn't like this big dramatic, like these big dramatic red flags, But to your point, in your inner world, there was so much more going on that I had no insight to,
right.
So really in my world, I had no context for any of these things. There was just okay, well, you got really angry. Well, maybe you had a bad day, or, it's so unusual and unlike you. And then not enough time had passed where that progressed, continued to progress, right? Where it would have been like, whoa, something's going on here, But then in recovery, you were able to do the same thing you were able to use the same skill set, but in a positive way.
Right.
And that is, my addiction is in a box. I'm going to put it all back in the box. I'm not going to access the box. I'm going to put all these walls and barriers up that hide the box. And now I'm going to go and do the work to figure out, why did I want to access the box in the first place?
Right. Yeah.
And so that part I think is key, because some people just stop at, I'm going to hide the box, I'm going to cover the box, I'm going to bury the box. And without doing the work, without connecting to a therapist, without really doing the deep soul searching that it takes to go, well, why did I build the box and fill it in the first place?
Right. Yeah.
And what's going to maybe happen in my life in the future that might stress me out enough to want to go back and unbury the box?
Yeah. And I've thought a lot about that. What would it take for me to relapse? What would it absolutely take for me to relapse? And I think through those things, and I haven't come up with an answer other than, let's say maybe it would be an extremely difficult, stressful, mind-blowing, like craziness situation. Let's say something bad happened to you or Keegan that was like, you know what I mean? But even then, it's like it would, I think, with everything I've learned, I would recognize the stress. I would recognize, okay, this is a danger area, and so I need to get support.
Yeah, I mean, and I think to answer, like, if somebody's thinking, well, how do you know that you would do that? Because you've been practicing it for the past 4 years,
right,
where you, if you're stressed, you're talking to people in your group.
Right.
And on occasion, if you're stressed enough, you call your therapist and say, hey, can we set up another session? We haven't had one in a long time. A lot's going on. So you've practiced that in small ways. So if something big happened now, you are so familiar with what the, if you want to call it the safety net, and you're also very familiar with addressing and identifying, I feel this way, very early on, as opposed to when the faster scale is being used as a predictive scale. It's, if you stay down here for 2 weeks without resolution, it's almost inevitable that you'll relapse.
Right.
You're able to identify, hey, I'm stressed, I'm dropping down within 24, 48 hours.
Right.
And then you have a list of so many things that I can do to address that. And that's community, that's vulnerability, that's honesty, that's connection.
Right. Absolutely.
So it's a combination really of, like, you've addressed the pain points, and then if a new pain point came, you know the process now. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, just to talk about the box of addiction, I think there was and I referred to it yesterday when we were doing a group session. I think there was a point where the box was opened again, not from a relapse standpoint or acting out, but to understand doing parts work, that it was like, hey, that box was a part of me, and there was a part of me that was trying to help me in the best way it knew how. Right. It was an inappropriate way.
Right.
But it was a way to, like, address the box. So it's still not this, like, box that's in the basement, you know what I mean, that you walk by and you're like, the box. Like,
that's an interesting, when you're thinking about it as a visual, because I was talking about burying it, but what you're talking about is being able to unpack and empty the box in a safe way.
Right.
So that it's actually not filled with, if you want to call it temptation, or like this dark secret that then, like, pulls at you anymore.
Right.
You've actually been able to sit with it, look at everything in it, address it, go, why were you here? And then now, if you had to, you could face something and go, that's not temptation to me anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's actually a better visual, because that, I want to sit with that for a second, because someone listening might go, what do you mean sit and face it? That sounds really scary, actually.
Yeah. Well, I think it was recognizing, what I used to think through the first, let's say, 2.5 years of recovery was the addiction is a cancer that needs to be cut out, or the addiction is a box that you need to. And once again, I hope people don't get lost on the analogy here, but I had to close the door to that box to get through an established sobriety and to start working through that. But in order to get all the way into recovery, at some point you have to address what was in the box and what was going on. And I think Jay Stringer does a tremendous job talking about what that is in the book Unwanted. He talks about, your specific patterns that you use to act out are they're not random. They actually have meaning, and there's something to that you need to get in there and address and understand why that is, what's part of that pattern. So,
and to be clear, when we say facing the stuff in the box, We're not saying that to learn about your patterns, you're going back in and looking at pornography.
That's right. Yeah, you're not going, and pulling up websites or anything like that, but you're kind of, you're addressing that. And so I think what I was able to do with the help of my therapist was to recognize and actually in some weird way thank that part of me that was working so hard, incredibly hard, overly hard, without boundary, without any of those things to help me, right? But it's all I knew. And once I learned new habits, I had all these other parts of me now that are like, hey, you can take a break. You can rest now. You can actually, sit down and let us take over. Let the healthier parts take over. And so that was a bit of a process. I probably couldn't have done that within the first 6 months of therapy, the first year of therapy. It was a process that I had to get to be able to recognize that.
So the burying of the box, the building of the wall is the getting into sobriety, which is the most important, and you have to do that. And then that takes a period of time for you to feel mentally and emotionally and physically stable and more secure in your mind and your body as the chemicals calm down, as you feel safer in your body, as you establish safety for your partner, and you feel more confident in controlling triggers, your physical responses, acting out, that sort of thing. So that's like sobriety is kind of setting all those accountability things up and, compartmentalizing that box.
Right.
Then recovery is the really, really scary part of unburying the box. Again, this does not mean looking at pornography or like revisiting things that you did or acting out in any way. It's the self-reflection piece and the deeper work of going, what did I put in that box and why? Right. And why did that part of me who is trying to medicate the wound of unlovability or the wound of not being enough or the wound of insecurity or whatever it is for each individual, facing that and going, why was this particular type of pornography the outlet? Why was calling a prostitute the outlet? Why was masturbation or sexual pleasure or like this false sense of connection? Why was that the quote unquote answer to this problem? And what did that provide me? In a way that like the part of you needed something like connection or affection or, whatever, which is a healthy human thing. We all need connection. We all need to feel safe and secure and loved, right? But the part chose an unhealthy path to get that, and it ends up being a false sense of that. So it's not fulfilling, which is why it doesn't heal the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. And then you end up in a toxic cycle. So the healing is understanding that and then replacing it with healthy connection, and learn, and even, and this isn't in any way like even in relation to your spouse. This is like with yourself, building those connections and those neural pathways within yourself, so that then you feel confident enough, and then you also learn how to build connection, like in your support groups, and to feel seen and to feel loved and to feel vulnerable and to learn how to communicate. And so you build all of those pathways and learn that it's safe. And then that part of you is like, cool, I don't need to act out anymore because I have access to feeling seen. I don't need to buy something to feel seen.
Right. Yeah.
Does that like sufficiently explain that, you think?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to the second weakness that can also be a strength, or vice versa. The ability to connect with others. So maybe in some ways this is like deep empathy, but it can get mixed up with our own wounding, our own pain points, and or our personal lack of boundaries. So this is one, I think I feel things very deeply. So maybe that'd be a better way of saying it. Ability to connect with others, or ability to feel things like on a deep, deep level. So I can feel things super deeply, which in a way for healing is like really important. You have to, everybody's heard the phrase, to heal it, you have to feel it, or to, you have to feel it to heal it. And so for me, like, I understand that. So, okay, I need to cry, or I need to communicate this, or I need to share what's going on, or I can identify, how I'm feeling, or I can really deeply empathize with people that are in pain. And in my work with betrayed partners, or, different stories that I hear, it's like, oh, I can completely understand their perspective and how they feel. And I get it, And even with you, I was like really, really able to connect with your process of healing and how that whole recovery process had to be hard and the addiction had to be hard. And while I was setting boundaries with you, I understood that like, that's a hard process for you. And, all of those kinds of things. Where that can go wrong though, is if, I also have like the wound of rejection, or I tend to have more anxiety and like rumination. And so because I feel things so deeply, I can almost like overfeel things or overanalyze things to the point where I spiral. And then when we have certain wounds, we can interpret situations through a specific filter of that wound. And so then, yes, something has happened, like a conversation or a relational experience that you've had. But then because you feel things so deeply and you have that negative filter set in place, now all of a sudden about 70% of the story that you're telling yourself in your head may not actually be reality if the filter wasn't, of the wounding itself wasn't in place. And so that's something I've sometimes struggled with, is like how much of what I am emotionally feeling right now in terms of like a relational experience with a friend of mine or somebody who hurt my feelings, or something where I felt rejected, or things of that nature, I kind of try to wrestle with. There's yes, we deserve to have boundaries and to be respected, and we try to communicate well and all this kind of stuff. But then how much of what is hurting my feelings is my interpretation of what happened versus what someone's intentions towards me and their feelings and thoughts towards me were actually true. And so part of that is like being aware of my own filters. Like, what are my filters? Right. So that I can actually ask that question and give myself a little bit of perspective, as opposed to just going all the way with my feelings, down that path.
Yeah. I as you were talking, I was thinking about Arthur Brooks is a Harvard professor, and he talks about empathy versus compassion. And he talks about people who are in like leadership roles. And you could argue, let's say a leadership role could be a betrayed spouse who's trying to set boundaries for their addict husband, right? So in that moment, if you have deep empathy, right, you can really feel the pain that addict's in. But maybe you, in the process of demonstrating empathy, you have put a boundary in, but then you just allow, because you're very empathetic to what the addict's going through, you allow them to blow right through that. Versus if you have compassion allows you to hold that boundary. It's like if you're a parent, you have compassion on your kids when they get in trouble, but you still, let's say they still need to be punished, right? If they, if you have deep empathy, maybe you don't do that, right? And so, like as you're talking, it's like I wonder if you struggle with the difference between compassion and empathy, like you really, really deeply feel, because empathy is a wonderful
empathy
thing
is
to
good.
have.
You have to have, and I don't even know that I would differentiate the difference between empathy and compassion, because you can have empathy for other people, but what you're talking about is having empathy with boundaries. So there is a spectrum where, and I see this when in working with and talking to so many betrayed partners, some as a protective mechanism will have no empathy and all the boundaries. And they'll just build a wall of boundary protection for themselves. Right. But they will really struggle with the ability to feel compassion and empathy for the addict. And now, of course, we're assuming this is a person who's trying, right, and demonstrating qualities worth empathy. But then on the other end of the spectrum, and a lot of what I see here is when people are really faith-based, is they tend to swing, and this isn't always true. There can be faith-based where they swing really strongly to boundaries too. And that's, again, I think that's a wound point. That's a self-protection point. That's a defense mechanism, because feeling empathy and compassion for someone also means feeling vulnerable. Right. So there's that. So I don't want to say, oh, you can't have faith if you feel that way. No, that's just a wounding point. But what I do see is a lot of faith-based women will sometimes swing very strongly towards the all I have is empathy, I'm not allowed to have boundaries end of the spectrum. And that is very dangerous, because then, to your point, you're allowing people to walk all over you, and you're walking over your own boundaries. And so that is just allowing yourself to be wounded over and over and over and over. And one of the things that I learned in one of my, and you worked with the same people. Some of my mentors explained a concept, and we've talked about this, I think, before, the idea of being kind versus being nice. And so empathy with no boundaries is you are such a nice person. Oh my gosh, you're the nicest person in the whole world because anybody can do anything and you're just going to love them to death. Mm-hmm. But being kind is doing the right thing even when it's hard. And for an addict, the kind thing to do to them is to set really strong boundaries and have them experience the consequences of their behavior. That's actually kindness. Kindness is giving people the tools that they need to instigate change in their life. The kindness to yourself is setting boundaries where people don't get to abuse you and that you're not going to participate in that cycle anymore. So a boundary is a kind thing. So I don't know if it's the difference between compassion is caring about other people. Empathy is going to the place where you can actually feel what somebody else is feeling. Either one, you can have all the compassion and empathy for an addict in the world, and you still need to hold boundaries. And you still need to have boundaries for yourself as a human being. And so I think you're able to I think there is a place in the middle where you can hold both.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you think about it from this particular case, I mentioned being a parent. When you discipline your children and you hold them accountable for, let's say, they blew a curfew and there was an articulated consequence. Well, it may be painful for you to watch that consequence go into place, but to your point, you're very kind in putting that in because that's how children learn. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about the addict has lost their ability to make good decisions. We have to find a way to get them to bring their prefrontal cortex back online. And so the best way to do that is through the use of boundaries and shutting internets down and all of these different things. And one of the best tools for the betrayed spouse is to be the carrier of that. Now, hopefully you don't have to do that the rest of your marriage. That would be a bad thing, right? At some point recovery should take over and that person's making wise decisions. But to your point, that's a very kind, compassionate thing to do for somebody. You can empathize with them if they're like, like when I call you, I'm like, yeah, I couldn't
access the internet.
I couldn't scan the QR code to let them know that I lost my luggage. You know what I mean?
I'm like, oh, that really sucks. Yeah. And we're not going to change that setting.
Right. And I didn't ask, so
right.
It's just, but it's, and that's a relatively minor thing. But, sometimes because of people's jobs and they were addicts or whatever, sometimes people have to leave those jobs. Mm-hmm. And that can be hard because if it was like a lifelong dream to get to that job and in order to get into healing, they have to take a different step. Right. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think being a good person is being able to recognize that that's hard. Mm-hmm. So for the betrayed partner, understanding, some of these boundaries are difficult, while still being able to hold to them. And for the addict going, this is hard and this is a painful consequence. And I made choices that brought me here. And so I'm going to move through this because this is the healthy choice to provide safety for my partner. Mm-hmm. And to understand yes, that's hard. And what you did and the pain that you caused your partner is also extremely hard. And so it is okay to go through that discomfort to create safety so that you guys can both live in a place where you have freedom again, which is ultimately the goal. Yeah. So and that actually came up the other day, this idea of, well, shouldn't freedom feel good, right? Yes, it should, but the process of getting there, because it requires change in every aspect of your life in a lot of ways in this particular situation, change is so uncomfortable even when it's good for you. There's always discomfort because the brain is wired for familiarity. Mm-hmm. And so it will want to go back to the familiar until you practice the new patterns enough. And so change in your relationship, change in your behavioral patterns, change in your communication, change in your thinking processes, changes in, what you do when you're stressed. All of these things that were deeply ingrained for months, weeks, years, decades for the addict. And for the betrayed partner, they had patterns of how to relate to you. They had patterns of feeling safe in their home. They had patterns of engaging with you day to day. They had patterns of going to work. They had all these patterns that are now disrupted. After discovery, both of the lives are extraordinarily disrupted. And that's very destabilizing for both people. Mm-hmm. So we can have compassion and empathy for each other while also going, we're going to move through this in a healthy way while having the head knowledge of going, change is going to be uncomfortable, even though it's good for us. And so having to change all of these things and set up these boundaries and have verbal check-ins. And sometimes I'll hear, there's emotional resistance from partners, because like, we don't want to do these things. I want to just be able to come home at the end of the day and enjoy something and not talk about the addiction. And totally, Patrick and I can completely get that. And, every once in a while it's like, yes, take a night, take a weekend, whatever, shut it off. Like, don't talk about it, those sorts of things. But until you guys are like really, really stabilized through the hardest parts of recovery, it is your life. It is the number one thing on your mind. It is the number one topic of conversation. It is the new phase of your life for a period of time. And I think the sooner people can really deeply accept that, the more you're going to be able to make the deep progress that actually allows that to at some point be in the past. But if we push that off and we don't address all of these changes with intentionality and with commitment from both people, then it will just keep coming up in the most uncomfortable ways, as opposed to we're going to do it. We're going to do it well. We're going to do it intentionally. We're going to move through this. It is going to hurt. And once we get through it, we can begin to heal.
Yeah.
And that's where we want to get you from. So I don't say these things like discourage you, because getting through it is so much better. Yeah, it's like so much more relaxing, and freedom does feel good. And we feel like so chill now. Most of the time we're just like living our life, and that's a great place to be. But we spent a lot of time in the mud, in the pain, in the discomfort, the number of conversations we had, the number of life choices we had. You didn't travel forever. You had all these boundaries. We were having check-ins constantly. I mean, there was nothing about our life for the first year and a half, 2 years that was the same as it was prior to discovery. Right. And so it has to be this awareness that like things will be different and change is uncomfortable. And I think when both people can understand that and go, oh, this discomfort is actually helping us in the long run, the change and the healing we will feel from this will become the new comfortable, the new familiar. And that's what we want. We want safety and healing to become the new comfortable for you and the new familiar. And we want your brain to be patterned to feel safe and relaxed and happy again. And that takes kind of working through the mud first.
Oh yeah, it takes a lot. I remember when Keegan's at West Point and I went to West Point, and I remember people said, hey, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard 4 years. And it was. And I had no idea what that meant when they said it was going to be hard. But you get through it, you figure it out, you kind of go, you start to, and you struggle and all these different things. And this process was no different. I remember, people saying, hey, your pain's going to go up. Things are going to be really, really difficult. I don't think either one of us had any idea what that would mean and how it would show up at various points and have these really high highs and then these really low lows and things like that. But it's like, I always tell the guys in the groups is, it's a day at a time. Just take it a day at a time. Win the day. Yeah. If you win the day, you win the week, and then you win the week, you win the months. And
I think that's one of the reasons that navigating sobriety as quickly as you can is important for the addict. Getting into the tools, the resources, the therapy, like whatever you have the time, finances, and ability to invest in the first 6 months, do it. Because the quicker you can feel mentally, emotionally, physically stable and not pulled to act out, the more safety you're going to create for your spouse, the more confidence you are going to feel in your ability to create this life that we're talking about. And the sooner the two of you can get to safety, the more quickly you're going to be able to feel like we're working through this together as a team. And if you can think and move through this, that we are navigating this as a team, you will be able to navigate those ups and downs more effectively. Right. But if if the betrayed partner feels like she's doing this on her own because the addict isn't being proactive enough in their own healing, and I see this all the time, that the betrayed partner feels like, well, if I don't do XYZ, then it won't happen. That it's very important. It's one of the primary things that a betrayed partner looks for is that the addict jumps in, takes full responsibility, proactively and voluntarily seeks out resources, goes to therapy, takes it like, I'm so thankful for this. Not that I have to do this, but I'm so thankful for this. Then comes back and says, this is what I'm learning. This is what I'm doing. And they're excited about it. And then their sobriety is progressing. That provides so much safety for the betrayed partner. And then once you guys can feel like you are working as a team, you can navigate all these ups and downs. If the two of you know that anxiety and depression are part of this process, then one of you, when you're sad, can come to the other and the other can help you. But if safety isn't there, then that piece is impossible. And you're going to be forced to only go to the external resources of your group or your therapist. And those are very, very important. And we want you to have those as well. But through this process, we want enough safety to be established quickly enough that the two of you can begin to support each other, because ultimately that's what's going to allow you to get through to the healing and the freedom and the connection and the reconciliation.
Yeah.
No, anything else on that one? Okay, number 3, weakness versus strength here. So we started with like the addict side, and then in the middle was like, people that can feel emotions very deeply. And then we're going to transition just to more of the betrayed side here. And perhaps maybe there's an example here with the addict as well, but a betrayed partner who gets things done. This can be a huge strength. And I think this kind of goes into what we were just talking about. It can turn into a problem later. So for a betrayed partner, that first 3 to 6 months, sometimes what I will hear a betrayed partner say is like, well, I don't want to, like, shouldn't he be doing X, Y, Z? Well, what we alluded to earlier, when you were talking about the brain and we were talking about the compartmentalization, all this kind of stuff, addict brain is a real thing. You as the betrayed partner who's maybe connected to resources or to this podcast has more clarity and vision right now than he does. If he has just been found out, he's still in addict brain, which means there's the compulsivity, there's the chemical processes that are still happening in the body. It's a not stable place necessarily, because he's not even in sobriety, much less recovery. He's just been discovered. So for the betrayed partner, this is a strength when you are somebody that can be very clear, have lists, check the boxes, get things done. And that is incredibly helpful for both of you. You get connected to a therapist. He gets connected to a therapist. You find a support group. He finds a support group. You get this book. You send him this book. So you're connecting him to all of these things that are really helpful for his healing. And then you're saying, okay, now you go and you do these things. But you've laid the groundwork as the betrayed partner. So that is a strength. And I think that is where it shines and is very helpful, that you have now laid the structure. After that, it's his job, again, like I was just mentioning before, that he now takes that on as his own job, that he becomes proactive. And that is where you get to step back a little bit. So where this strength can become a little bit of a weakness is when the betrayed partner goes, but I kind of like this feeling of control. And I feel like I have to be in control, because if I'm not in control, then bad things will happen, right? And that's a pattern that is born out of wounding, because maybe there's truth to that. Maybe you haven't done something one day and it didn't happen. So where that can sort of fall into, again, the strength is like it has to happen in the first 3 months, like to create this stabilization for the two of you. But it needs to transition where he ends up taking his own recovery into his own hands and then demonstrating his healing and his progress to you. But the betrayed partner has to be willing to let go, because at that point, you need to receive the information. It's like a boundary. You need to receive the information. Are they able? Are they willing? Do they want to recover? Because if they do, they're going to start doing it on their own. You've given them the tools, you've given them the resources, you've given them the structure. They have everything they need to do it on their own and to take it seriously. And you as the betrayed partner, at some point, maybe after 90 days of sobriety, for example, or a few months down the road, you need to be able to see, okay, what are they going to do with this? Because again, that's information for you to be able to make decisions as you move forward.
I think what's key in that, and this is good advice for the addicts, is, at some point, and you're right, there's an addict brain thing. You're just not thinking through things. Like I remember a couple instances where I I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I wasn't being proactive, and you kind of got on me about it, and then I was like, oh shoot, I because I just wasn't thinking about it like in those terms. But the sooner that the addict can become proactive, the sooner the addict can start to create plans of safety, the sooner the addict can start to say, hey, I think this is something that we should do. Hey, let's sit down and talk. I heard about this check-in. Like, don't, like if a check-in is something, a weekly check-in is something that you all have decided to do, the addict initiates it. Don't wait for the, I guess you want to have the check-in tonight. I thought we were just gonna, drink beer and watch football. You know
and
what I mean?
Just because it's something that the two of you agreed on, that doesn't mean that the betrayed partner should be the one to bring it up. This is a safety creating thing.
Right.
I cannot tell you how many conversations with betrayed partners I've had about this where they feel frustrated and like it's not being taken seriously if the addict forgets about the check-in. Because they will wait to see if you're taking it seriously. They'll say, hey, let's have this check-in every Friday night or every Sunday or whatever it is that you guys have agreed on. And then you say, okay, let's do it. And then they wait on Friday. And they wait, and then it's Saturday, and then they're frustrated and hurt because you didn't bring it up. So it's I'm telling you, I've talked to so many people. This is a real pain point. One of the primary things that a betrayed partner wants to see, if they bring up a boundary, if they bring up a healing suggestion, that you take it, you run with it.
Yeah.
And what you should do, my suggestion, is view it as safety promoting. If your betrayed partner is asking you for information or asking you to do a check-in or something like that, I want you to translate that information as she doesn't feel safe. She's communicating something that will help her feel safe.
Right.
I'm going to put this in my phone 30 minutes before we agreed to do it. I'm going to get a reminder for myself. And then I'm going to bring it up and say, hey, you asked me to do a check-in. I've thought about these questions. I'd like to present them to you. Do you have anything you'd like to add? Anything else you're worried about?
Yeah.
And then checking in that way. Huge difference. Huge. I mean, I cannot emphasize enough how meaningful that is for a betrayed partner. And
I think if the perspective is, okay, you spend a lot of time and energy on your addiction or your compulsivity, and I understand it because of what I know now about the brain, right? That's the betrayed spouse, So I get it. I don't like it. But I'd like for you to put some heightened level of energy into. You've demonstrated that you could use a heightened level of energy to do something. Yes, I understand it was an addiction. But I'd like for you to use some degree of energy and emotion that carries you towards recovery behaviors. Yeah. And so don't
show me through your words, actions, and behaviors that this is important to you.
That's right.
As important or hopefully more important than your addiction behaviors.
Right. Exactly. So
and another way of hearing that too is show me that I am more important than your addiction behaviors. Because again, translating that as this check-in is going to help me feel safe. You coming to me and telling me that you went to therapy, me not having to remind you about it, you telling me, hey, I got this book and it's about understanding the trauma of the betrayed partner and I'm going to look through that, and me not having to bring that to you. All of those things are ways that an addict can be proactive and say, I'm taking this seriously.
Right.
I'm taking this seriously. You don't have to remind me. It is the number one priority in my life. And oh, by the way, so are you.
Right.
And so I care that I did this to you. It's not just about sobriety. It's about helping the partner heal. If you guys want to reconcile, both of those things have to be like the top two priorities.
Absolutely.
Anything else around that?
Nope.
Yeah. Okay. So compartmentalization can be a strength and a weakness. Deep connection to our emotions can be a strength and a weakness, how we manage them anyway. And then someone who's able to get things done. It can be a real strength, but when it is associated with a sense of control that we're unable to let go, can become a weakness. So we want to make sure. So what do we do about that? We identify sort of which end of the spectrum are we on, or are we sort of in the middle? That'd be great. We tend as humans to lean one end of a spectrum or another. And so when we can identify those patterns, then we can begin to connect with, the feelings associated and how do we process through so that we can end up somewhere in the middle in that healthy range. And of course, I always encourage everyone, connect with a coach, a therapist, someone who can help you navigate these things, because like I was talking about my own story with my own woundings and my own filters, sometimes it is hard to see our own stuff. And we can get so caught up in our own filter and our own story that we believe that is 100% true. Until we've identified that we have a filter, we've identified the story that we tell ourselves and the wounding that we are interpreting things from. And then we're able to go, okay, I know I'm aware of my wounding. I'm aware of my filter. Okay, I'm pulling this information through that filter. Maybe it's not 100% true if I was able to change that filter. Mm-hmm. So working with someone who can help you begin to identify those things is one of the pieces of how we begin to process that over time, so we can actually begin to heal the wounds, shift the filter, and then live more and more and more in the reality of the actual situation. And that just helps us become better people. It helps us communicate better. It helps us to be triggered less. If we are triggered, it helps us analyze our triggers more effectively, those sorts of things. Well, thank you so much for joining this week. We will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.